When you think of 1981 baseball cards, you probably think of something like this, or a massive collection like this. While 1981 might not have been the year that junk wax started, it was a major contributor to the problem. And there are just so many of these cards out there. Have you ever wondered why we have so many of these cards? Well, I tell you what, the answer to that question is pretty simple. And yes, it's another evening edition of the Baseball Replay Journal. Welcome along. We had more cards then because we had more card companies and because there was a major incentive for those companies to print more product. And this all started because of a key court case. But to understand the court case, we've got to back up a little bit. The baseball cards of the early 1950s were absolutely beautiful. In its first major release in 1952, the Topps Chewing Gum Company really pulled out all the stops. Bowman, Topps' competitor, responded with the 1953 Bowman Color set, which is still considered one of the greatest baseball card sets of all time. Rivalry started the brief period known as the Bubblegum Card Wars. Now, that period in the 1950s was really the golden age of baseball cards. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. So both Topps and Bowman made better versions of their sets with every passing year, and both companies were in heavy competition with each other to sign the best players for their sets. And the collectors are the ones that benefited from all of this. In the end, Topps had just enough to overcome the more established Bowman and established itself as the king. I don't think it's the only reason, but I'm pretty sure that these amazing backs had something to do with the Topps dominance. But of course, Bowman also had some of the most iconic cards of all time during that famous era. Though it's not everybody's favorite set, I've always been a fan of the television style of 1955 Bowman. And in hindsight, you do have to wonder what Bowman would have thought of next if the company had been able to hold on just for a few more years. But the thing is, when you look back at what happened, it's pretty clear that Bowman didn't really stand much of a chance. The thing is that Topps totally dominated the market, especially in baseball. But of course, it was Topps' 1955 All-American football card set that wound up putting Bowman out of business for good. And Topps wound up acquiring all of the rights to everything Bowman in early 1956. Since there was practically no mainstream media coverage of any of this, I have to rely on this analysis from Dean's Cards, which talks about Topps acquiring Bowman for only $200,000. For Topps, the Bubblegum Card Wars had been financially painful, and Topps held on tightly to the monopolistic rights to sell sports cards packaged with bubblegum, which had become the industry standard by that time. Now, there's another story behind why baseball cards went from an add-in in cigarette packages to being associated with bubblegum, but that's going to have to wait for another video, probably a lot longer away from now. The important thing here is that Topps had established its monopoly and that it slowly started to do what all monopolies do. Topps cut corners, it started to cut costs, it started to increase prices, it cut the quality of the cards, and it engaged in a lot of monopolistic market behavior. And you don't have to look much further than the cards themselves to see all of this. So this is a 1957 Topps Ted Williams. This is a great card from what is undoubtedly one of the best card sets of all time. The back is very attractive, even though there are really only two printing colors. Lesser players like Donruss received a biographical sketch along with a cartoon, and it still looks nice, though it was nothing like those 1955 Topps cards. By 1970, the fronts weren't quite as crisp and sharp, and the graphical stylings were questionable at best. Though the backs looked okay, they seemed to follow the same old pattern as always. It was like Topps was stuck doing things the same way over and over again. Now, 1980 Topps is actually one of my favorite sets of all time. I just love this design and the facsimile autographs. But the decline in quality was obvious from the backs, where the illustrations and the stats were all done in a single color, with just a little bit of variation in the background. So to put it to you bluntly, Topps was getting really lazy with this design, and that's what happens when the competition goes away. Now, that's not to say that nobody was competing with Topps. In fact, there was one company that was determined to break into the baseball card industry, and it simply would not take no for an answer. Technically speaking, these so-called W515 strip cards from 1923 are the first cards created by the Fleer Corporation. There were supposedly 120 cards in this strip set, though only 60 cards are known to exist. Fleer had started off life as a candy company back in 1885, and it was the first company to market bubblegum way back in 1906. This was Blibber Blubber bubblegum, which was allegedly so sticky that a solvent was needed to remove it if it touched human skin. Blibber Blubber eventually gave way for Double Bubble in 1928, which is the gum that established Fleer as a major player in the bubblegum industry. My guess is that the 1923 Fleer cards were sold with the candies and the snacks that Fleer produced back in those days. It's hard to say, of course, because there's no like baseball card hobby publications or industry publications from that time, and the cards themselves offer no clues at all. And traditionally, most baseball card collectors have never really heard of this set because it's really, really hard to find. It really wasn't until the demise of Bowman that Fleer decided that it wanted to get back into the baseball card world. The Leaf Chewing Gum Company apparently asked Topps about some sort of agreement to let it make bubblegum cards not long after that war ended, but Topps refused. And it kind of makes sense. After all, Topps is the company that had experienced the most risk and uncertainty during the heyday of the bubblegum card wars. Leaf eventually produced a set in 1960, though the cards were black and white and were really unattractive. And as crazy as it seems today, Leaf sold the cards as baseball photos inside a 5-cent package of marbles. Now, I want you to remember that price, 5 cents. The price of a pack of baseball cards is one of the things that we're going to track as we talk about the birth of the junk wax era. 5 cents wasn't exactly a great deal in 1960, by the way. The packaging was pretty ugly, and it was 5 cents for marbles and an undetermined number of cards. I'm guessing maybe like 5. I've got to believe that the marbles probably caused these packs to split open from time to time. 1960 Topps, meanwhile, is a very attractive full-color set, though it was one of the kind of funky horizontal sets that Topps tried there for a few years. Once again, the backs are just simply fantastic. The Leaf backs are relatively boring. Now, the Topps cards back in 1960 came in one-set packages for one card with gum. This is the same price that Topps had charged way back in 1952. 5 cents would get you a larger pack with 5 cards, I think, and your stick of gum. And as usual, you could find rack packs like these with a whopping 36 cards for only 29 cents, which was a real bargain. Topps knew its market well, and it knew just how to package its products for its customers. Now, Leaf was not the only company that challenged Topps back in those days. So back in 1959, Fleer, who we just talked about, threw its hat into the ring as well. And this is one of those famous Fleer sets that you either love or you really hate. Fleer managed to get Ted Williams to sign an exclusive contract with the company, but couldn't get any other current players to sign along with him. And so 1959 Fleer is simply a Ted Williams set. It's a great set if you're a Ted Williams fan, I guess, but 80 cards of the same player must have been exhausting to collectors back in those days. As you can see here, 5 cents got you a pack of 6 cards with bubblegum, and it was pretty obvious that this was the Ted Williams set. Now, Topps didn't really do all that much at first to try to knock Fleer down. After all, Fleer's set only had like one player, and Fleer really had a hard time breaking out of that mold. In fact, Fleer made one of the biggest mistakes that any baseball card company can make, and they've made this mistake from now and then. They tried to make cards that featured only old and retired players. 1960 Fleer was a set featuring only old players, many of whom had passed away. In 1961, Fleer had the exact same problem. Now, as cool as it would have been to have a Lou Gehrig card, most kids in 1961 just didn't care. Most people want to know what's going on today, not what happened 40 years ago. Well, that's exactly the problem that I faced with this channel, as you probably already know. But the thing is, if you're interested in supporting further education on baseball history, the history of baseball cards, like the hobby in general, history of the culture of the sport and stuff like that, please consider becoming a channel member. You get extra videos, you get early access to videos like this one once I finish editing it and put it up, and all sorts of other cool stuff. And if you really like watching old baseball broadcasts like I do, or listening to old broadcasts on the radio in high quality, check out my Patreon, the link's in the description. Now, Fleer didn't do very well back in those days, but hey, maybe I can do a better job instructing the public about the history of baseball than Fleer did. Anyway, in 1963, Fleer finally put it together. The 1963 Fleer set might not look perfect, but it certainly was an improvement over past sets. Fleer had signed a number of players who were sick of the Topps shenanigans, and these cards looked just fabulous. This was the famous set sold in 5-cent packages with a sugarless cookie. The idea apparently was to avoid a potential lawsuit by Topps by not including bubblegum. Of course, that means that you got some pretty ugly looking packs like this one, since the cookies didn't exactly hold up all that well over the decades. But the packaging looked nice, and this was clearly a major competitor to Topps. And the thing is that Topps knew this, so Topps took Fleer to court, and the resulting court battle lasted like forever. You can actually find a few mentions of the court case in contemporary newspaper articles, though these are mostly the human interest stories about collecting. Notice here that Topps was referred to by its brand Bazooka and Fleer by a double bubble. In the end, though, the financial strain of the court case prevented Fleer from releasing anything more than the first 66 card series of the 1963 set. Anyway, that was the last time that a serious competitor to Topps entered the market, until 1981 that is. And yes, this was Fleer that forced the issue in 1981. It's amazing how long these bubblegum card wars go on for. In the middle of 1980, the Eastern District Court of Pennsylvania came down with a major ruling under the antitrust laws. Among other things, the court ruled that Topps could no longer sign monopolistic contracts with baseball players. It also ruled that Major League Baseball's Player Association had to grant licenses to companies other than Topps, and it named Fleer in particular. And in the interest of history, it is interesting to note that Topps had $67 million of sales in 1978. Fleer, meanwhile, had only about $15.2 million of sales without baseball cards. Anyway, so there's your backstory in a nutshell, and I know it took forever to tell, but we had to get all the details in. Now, let's go into the cards themselves, and we're going to start with that 1981 Fleer set. The 1981 Fleer set was produced in massive quantities. It was also riddled with all sorts of errors. Some of these were corrected. For example, this Steve Carlton error with the year 1066 on the back was eventually fixed. And some cards, like this one of Mike Schmidt, Pete Rose, and Larry Boa, had kind of subtle errors. It might take you a little while to realize that they forgot the card number on the back. So 1981 Fleer wound up going through at least 2 major printings. I think that there was probably a third, maybe a fourth. Now the second printing was to correct most of the errors in the first printing, although a bunch still got through. As a result, there are just tons of these cards out there. You see, one of the issues that Fleer faced back in 1981 is how much the industry had changed since 1963. Baseball card dealers were now a major part of the hobby and had connections with distributors to purchase product directly in mass quantities. Plus, the 1981 sets were released earlier than ever. In fact, Topps apparently started selling its cards in December 1980. And that July 1980 ruling meant that Fleer only had a couple of months to get its act together, so problems were inevitable. So anyway, at that time you had this totally crazy combination. You had an industry of collectors that was growing really rapidly. You had established hobby distributors, some of whom had been around for decades, by the way, and there was all this entry into the market by brand new companies. Now, what I think happened is I think that Fleer wound up completely misreading the market's signals. They just printed to where they thought that demand was, and in the end they made their own cards practically worthless. This extremely nice looking complete set sold for less than $100, including shipping, for example, and I'm guessing that the buyer overpaid here. And it's really not that hard to find complete sets that sell with free shipping for much less than that price, as long as you're not that particular about condition. I mean, $50 here isn't exactly free, but it gives you an idea of where the market is at and just how common these cards really are. Now, the thing is, of course, that Topps was in a much better position to take advantage of the recent increase in interest in baseball cards. I mean, for one thing, everybody had heard of Topps, nobody had heard of Fleer or Donruss. The company did a great job. In fact, 1981 Topps is one of those really nice-looking top sets. The design was timeless and classic. However, you should note the small Topps writing in the bottom right-hand corner on the front. That was something that was controversial at the time. The backs, meanwhile, continued what had become the Topps tradition of ugly two-color. But even with my complaints, this really is a nice-looking set. It's clear that Topps had been around for years. And where that really stands out is in how these cards were sold and packaged. So remember, it cost 5 cents for a pack of 6 cards with gum in 1960, or you could get one of those 1-card packages for 1 cent with gum. Let's see how that changed. So by 1970, you still got 10 cards for 10 cents. There was no inflation at all. Sadly, old man inflation rolled around by 1975. 1975 was the year that your pack of 10 cards would cost you 15 cents. This reflected the stagflation crisis that had swept America at that time. By 1980, a quarter would give you 15 cards. That's another bit of hidden inflation if you do the math. Now you have to keep in mind that this came at a time where baseball ticket prices were also increasing. So you would pay like $6, $6.50 or so for a single reserve seat in anywhere in North America at any major league ballpark. Player salaries were also on the rise, and the fans started to feel like they were being milked to death. That's a feeling that eventually boiled over with the 1994 strike, but we are still a long way away from that. Anyway, in 1981, Topps had its best looking packaging to date, which was almost certainly in preparation for its competition. But that 15 card pack now cost a whopping 30 cents. You could always get a cello pack for 49 cents with 28 cards. Not quite as good as it had been in 1960, but hey, it was still something. And there were tons of variations, like a 59-cent super pack that was a cello pack with extra gum. I'm not sure why you would want Super Bazooka gum, but whatever. Anyway, Topps was the leader in varieties of packaging, including packs like this grocery rack pack, a design that still looks really appealing to this day. Now, Fleer, on the other hand, was totally behind the 8-ball when it came to packaging. Fleer could do wax packs with a single stick of gum, but that's really all it offered. So Fleer met that 30-cent price point but gave you 17 cards instead of 15. I guess the idea was to get kids to choose its product because you got the 2 extra cards. And you got 2 free packs in your box, which was excellent if you were interested in buying a full box and doing a total box rip. But all that they had were the wax packs. There were no specially priced cello packs, there were no rack packs, there was none of that fancy stuff. And then there was also another competitor, that was Donruss. Donruss was another candy and gum company that started up in the mid-1950s. And in 1981, it came from out of nowhere to sign agreements with Major League Baseball and the Baseball Players Association to make its first card set. The fronts weren't really much to look at, and the backs were even worse. And some of these errors were crazy, like the 986 home runs attributed to Bobby Bonds. I didn't know that Bobby had it in him. So the interesting thing is that the backs of those Donruss cards look a lot like the backs of the Major Japanese set of 1981, which is something I didn't realize until I started doing the research for this video. That would be this 1981 Caldee set, which has absolutely gorgeous card fronts. The backs aren't much to look at and consist of the same career notes and short highlights that we saw in Donruss. Personally, I think this Caldee set looks better than any of the 3 North American sets, but it's really hard to collect even with this global market. Boy, you know, if only Donruss had put out a set with fronts that looked like that, they would have dominated the market right away. I mean, that looks absolutely beautiful. But as you guys know, 1981 was the year of putting boxes and stupid artifacts around like everything on the front of these cards, and you know, it's a shame. Anyway, like Fleer, Donruss stuck to the wax pack only method of distribution and printed a ton of cards. Well, Donruss upped the ante, offering 18 cards in a 30-cent pack. You didn't get any extra packs in your wax box, but I don't think that you would want them anyway. And like Fleer, you can still find really nice looking Donruss sets for relatively cheap. So I actually owned this 1981 Donruss set for a while. I sold it back a few years ago. We had to, pay the rent. I mean, it's an okay set, I guess. I really don't care much for the backs, though. And a lot of the photos are really out of focus. Plus, the thing is that Donruss organized all the cards by team, which kind of felt like a jip. I mean, you don't see any, surprises. It's more fun when you're, flipping through the pages and there are different teams and, stuff represented instead of just every card looking the same, you know what I mean? 1981 was really the year that collecting started to take off, and you had people like Bill Madden writing articles about collecting in the Sporting News. For example, Madden noted that all of Fleer's numbering issues created extra demand for its cards, but you've got to remember that these sets were still in print at that time. Anyway, all 3 companies printed to demand and well past it, which is why you can still find tons of unopened product to this day. And this kind of makes sense. You see, the companies were selling product as soon as it printed. There were dealers and speculators who were having a total field day with this, especially with the dozens upon dozens of error cards in the first printings of Fleer and Donruss. So you've got higher than normal demand because of all the error cards. There are multiple supply chains around because the dealers keep butting in, and there are all these new dealers that are being established all over the place. And then you have the speculators entering the market because they thought that baseball cards were penny stocks, and then there were kids, as usual, going nuts over baseball cards. Then you add in the fact that these companies were competing with each other by putting in extra cards in the packs, and you've got a perfect recipe for hyperinflation. Oh, and then there was also this little thing called Fernando Mania. Fernando Valenzuela managed to pitch 17 2/3 innings in 10 games at the end of the 1980 season without giving up a single earned run. Fernando struck out 16 batters in the process and won 2 games. And Fernando was simply amazing in early 1981.
Or John Curtis for San Diego. The 2-2 pitch. Screwball got him looking. No contest. 5 strikeouts for Valenzuela. And at the end of 4, no score.
Fernando's incredible start to the season led naturally to massive speculation on his rookie cards. Now, the thing is that rookie card collecting had already been a thing in the hobby for a little while. It really went back to the days of the 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle, which of course was not Mantle's rookie card. By 1981, though, everybody knew that rookie cards were a big deal, and if you had a rookie that was like mowing everybody down like Valenzuela was that year, his card was as good as gold. Articles like this one from a rural California newspaper in March 1980 focused on the financial aspects of the hobby. You'll notice here the direct mention of higher prices for rookie cards. Fleer was the first company to the punch on Valenzuela, opting to give him his own rookie card in the 1981 set, complete with this misspelling. This is the kind of clean card back that rookie collectors prefer. Fernando had to share his Topps rookie card with Jack Perconte and Mike Scioscia. The backs of these Future Star cards just don't have that same effect. Meanwhile, Donruss completely missed out on Fernando Mania, giving us instead a rookie card of Win Remmerswaal. The Holland-born Remmerswaal might have had a great first name, but he certainly didn't have much of a career. In fact, I think one of the reasons why that first Donruss set has always been underappreciated is the fact that it didn't have that key rookie card. Everybody wanted a Valenzuela back in the day. 1981 Donruss had the flimsiest cardstock of the three companies. The photos were worse than anybody else. Most of the cards are boring as can be. The backs of the cards are just horrible. You don't want to look at them. And there were errors like all over the place. And there were tons and tons and tons of these cards everywhere. That's just not the way to do it, guys. Now, of course, the newspapers couldn't keep away. They reported on Valenzuela's rookie card in the same breath as Babe Ruth, Dizzy Dean, and Ty Cobb. And then there's this note from a Jackson, Michigan newspaper. Hold on to those rookie cards because dealers are selling a ton of them, which is supposedly a sign that prices are going to increase. This same article mentioned the famous Craig Nettles Fleer Air card, which was the most famous card in that set for years and apparently commanded $25 at one point. Now, if you really want it, you can get the Air card and the fixed card together for a couple bucks today. But the thing is, today you probably don't care about this Air card because Greg Nettles will not sniff the Hall of Fame. And by the way, neither will Valenzuela, though his card is still the major selling point of that 1981 Fleer set. And it's also the reason why people like that Topps Traded set as well. Topps had issued a Traded update set a few times in the 1970s, which featured famous cards like this one. The idea was to issue cards for players who had changed teams after the original cards went to print. In 1981, Topps decided to package the cards as a single complete box and sold them straight to dealers without printing any wax packs for them at all. This helped get Fernando his official Topps rookie card, which still sells for a premium today. Collectors don't seem to mind that these cards were never actually sold to the public in packs. In fact, that means that you're not going to get one that was stained with decaying bubblegum. That set also gave us the Tim Raines rookie card, which is a player who actually is in the Hall of Fame. Anyway, this set helps solidify a Topps philosophy of holding back cards of star rookies for the Traded set. This is something that would haunt the company later in the 1980s. Now, in the end, these cards weren't really that much of a collector's item. There aren't any like 1981 Topps cards that are anything like that famous 1980 Rickey Henderson rookie card. The Fleer and the Donruss Air cards have been met with indifference for the most part by modern collectors. But before we wrap up, there are a few other 1981 sets that I really want to mention. If you're interested in it for whatever reason, you can find sets like this Conlon collection, the Sporting News set. As usual, most collectors don't care about retrospective cards for long-deceased players, and these cards are really ugly. The scans are useful if you're looking for pictures for a video project, however. And by the way, these contemporary specialty and premium sets that offer like a bunch of retired player cards should be treated with a lot of skepticism. You know the ones I'm talking about, especially the ones that come in like $20,000 briefcases. You guys are nuts for buying that stuff. The truth is that none of these sets have ever stood the test of time. If you're going to collect, I recommend collecting today's players, not this collector slop that nobody will ever want to buy. Or if you're going to collect vintage, collect players that have cards that are contemporary to when they were actually playing. That's what most people want. People also tend to forget about the Kellogg's 3D Superstar sets, which were the first sets to feature those cards with that 3D optical illusion, like Sports Flicks. The backs are bland, but the cards are still pretty scarce and they don't really look that bad. It's not too hard to find nice sets, so this is mostly because demand for these cards is not really that high. You should know that these cards only came together as a full box after you sent in 2 proof of purchase box tops. There were no cards in actual serial boxes. The boxes themselves look something like this, and yeah, there are hoarders who still collect this kind of thing. So I gotta be honest with you guys, Like, collecting cards is great, but if you're collecting cereal boxes like this because they have advertisements for baseball cards, you probably have a problem. At some point, you've crossed that line between collecting like meaningful things that have value to you and just hoarding stuff because it's stuff. Anyway, there are also the O-Pee-Chee variant of Topps cards, which were printed for the Canadian market. There were only 374 cards in the O-Pee-Chee set, and they are a lot scarcer than the Topps cards. As was the case with O-Pee-Chee's hockey sets, these sets were flimsier and are much more prone to damage than the United States equivalents. Of course, that means that a set in nice condition theoretically might appreciate. O-Pee-Chee came in packs of 8 cards for $0.25, and I'm not sure if that was a better or worse deal than what we got in the United States. But Topps was at least nice enough to let them use that great box art. Anyway, there's one more thing that I should mention here, given what the focus of the Baseball Replay Journal actually is. This is the 1980 Strat-O-Matic season, the original one. Strat-O-Matic's 1981 printing of the 1980 season cards included hit numbers all on the 4 column for every single pitcher, which was really controversial. So you can see it here in this Dennis Leonard card. Strat players were extremely upset and sent in dozens of letters complaining to the Strat-O-Matic Review. As a result, the game company offered a reprinted set of 168 printers cards, advanced side only with the other side blank, for $2 and the cost of shipping. Now, the interesting thing is, despite all the complaints, most of Strat-O-Matic's customers did not take the company up on that offer, so that 168 card set is really rare. It's not easy to find, especially in good condition. In fact, it turns out that Strat-O-Matic's 168 card corrected set of pitchers with only one side is almost certainly the rarest and the most valuable of the 1981 baseball card sets. That's just a little tip for you guys, just in case you didn't know that about the market. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this real deep dive into this. Let me know what you think of this in the comments, and I do plan on doing more of these videos like this, so stay tuned.